Hello, everyone. Hi, Daphne. Okay, so hello. On behalf of the Shawnee County K-State Research and Extension Office, welcome. Today's presentation is the fourth and final of our Planting Wild webinar series. We are so pleased entomologist and Xerces Outreach Ambassador, Dr. Daphne Mays, will join us with her talk on native bees. Before I turn it over to Dr. Mays, I'd like to ask that all participants please turn off their cameras and microphones for the duration of the presentation. If you should have any questions, please type them over in the chat box. And once the presentation is over, we can all turn on our mics and cameras and have some Q&A. We will be recording today's webinar, which you'll be able to find later this week on YouTube, our website, and also Kathy Bartles will send out a copy to all of our registered participants along with a very short survey. I ask that you please do fill out our 3-minute survey. It helps us continue to provide quality programming. Well, without further ado, it is my extreme pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Daphne Mays. Dr. Mays?
Hi, thank you all for joining me for this talk that I'm very excited to share with you today. I guess if I can go ahead and share my screen, that might help here. Does that seem like it's showing up okay?
Looks great, Daph.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, Leslie, and thank you so much to the Shawnee County Extension Master Gardener Group for the invitation to present to you about a topic that I've studied for my master's and PhD research. And today I'll be focusing more on the types of bees that you may be coming across in your gardens, and hopefully will shed some light on what you may be seeing out there. And hopefully at the end of the talk, you'll have learned something new and perhaps be inspired to learn more about these fascinating creatures. And so just to kind of go through a little bit of the outline for my talk, I'm going to be just going through some basic information about bees, what makes a bee versus something different. Also, I'd like to go through bee diversity, because when I started learning about bees, I was much like many other people, and you know, just didn't realize how incredible their diversity really is. And so I'll give you a glimpse into that, and you may be surprised as well as to how incredibly diverse bees are on our planet. Then we'll talk about bee pollination, and we'll go into some native bee ecology. And then finally, we'll end with some of the threats to native bee species and what we can do to help protect them. So first, just a little bit of local trivia. Many people may know that our state insect in Kansas is the honeybee, but a lot of people are surprised when I let them know that the honeybee is actually not native to the United States. And so although it's an incredibly important insect in pollination, even the pollination services it provides to many types of foods that we grow here in the US, it's not actually a native species, though we benefit greatly from its services and from the products that they make as well. They were actually brought over by early Spanish and English colonists, and were referred to as white man's flies. And so what makes honeybees kind of interesting amongst other bees, they are quite unique in the world of bees, as I'll share with you here in a little bit. But just a quick few things that I can point out about whether you're seeing one or not flying around is honeybees have a corbicula, which I've pointed out here. This is also called the pollen basket, and it's a structure of hairs that are on the back leg of the bee, and this helps them carry pollen and nectar back to their hive from the flowers. And so they visit the flowers and they collect and they pack it together and carry it on their back legs in this sort of basket that's got these hairs that kind of branch around and help hold that in place. There are other bees that have corbiculas, as I'll show you later, but that's one definitely distinguishing characteristic that you'll see in a honeybee. Another one that makes honeybees unique is that they have hairy eyes, and so you can see that kind of nicely on this picture here, and that is different than other bees. So just to kind of go into a little bit of review about basic information about what makes bees insects. They're in the order Hymenoptera. They have those 3 distinct body parts, so the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, and 6 legs. They go through complete metamorphosis. So a lot of times people think about butterflies. They have very distinct metamorphosis that many people are familiar with. And bees also go through complete metamorphosis. And so they start off as an egg, and then that egg hatches. It goes through a series of larval stages in which it's feeding on the pollen and nectar that was provided for it. And after a series of larval stages, it will go and it will develop into a pupa, and then eventually will emerge as an adult that we're most familiar with seeing flying around our gardens. And I mentioned that they're in the order Hymenoptera. Other insects in this order include wasps and ants. And what makes bees unique, particularly unique especially in relation to wasps, is that unlike wasps, bees feed on nectar and pollen as larvae and as adults. And so wasps are predatory, catching other insects oftentimes, or parasitizing other insects, and that's what the larvae feed on as it grows. Adults may feed on the nectar of flowers, but the young are predaceous and they feed on other organisms for their growth. Another important difference is that bees are hairy, and so they have plumose hairs that can be found. Some bees are very hairy, like bumblebees. Some may not have hardly any hairs at all on them. But if you were able to zoom in closely and look at the hairs on a bee, you would see that they're plumose, like a bird feather, and they actually branch out. And so that increased surface area, you can imagine, is really important for their ability to collect the pollen and have that pollen sticking to their bodies so that they're able to carry that back to their nest. And so let's see here. Here's another image here of the life cycle of a bee. This is a leafcutter bee. We do have native species of leafcutter bees here in Kansas. And what you can see here is there's a lot going on. It's a really cool picture, so I'll kind of walk you through it. First, I highlighted an arrow there that says scopa. And so the scopa is, for this type of bee, the leafcutter bee, that's how it carries its pollen. So I mentioned before that honeybees have that corbicula where it carries the pollen on its legs. These bees in this family, this is what characterizes the megachilid bees, or the leafcutter or resin bees, and I'll explain some of the other relatives in that family later. But the key to what what really groups them together and you being able to identify them while they're flying around your garden is this dense aggregation of hairs below its abdomen. So it kind of looks as though, oftentimes when I've seen them, it looks as though their bodies have just been picked up and dipped into pollen, and you can see that it's bright yellow. Sometimes, depending on what they're foraging on, that can be different shades of colors, but you can see that it's evident that they're carrying pollen underneath their abdomen. And so that's a key characteristic for that group. For this group, they have the leafcutter bees, they nest in, you've probably seen these advertised. This is sort of a little bee nest that can be bought at different garden stores. We can talk about the pros and cons of that later, but it does provide some habitat for this type of bee. They nest above ground in cavities, and in nature they would occupy cavities that would be similarly made in like a log by beetles that have excavated holes in that wood, or also they could make nests inside of like a stem of a plant that's hollow. And so for these bees, this is a really cool cross section here at the bottom, and it shows those stages that I had mentioned just on the previous slide. So you see that pollen ball has been gathered, and in that first cell, the one that's all the way on the inside, the egg has hatched, and that first larval instar, that they're starting to feed on it. And as you move across through the nest and look at the cells next to it, you can see that the growth of those larvae are kind of, you can see them growing as they're consuming that pollen ball. They're growing, they're getting bigger, and eventually they form a pupa, and then they will leave that nest and emerge as an adult. And so that's kind of a really interesting and fascinating view into what's something that we normally don't get to see, because all of these things are happening, you know, in our gardens or around us, but we rarely get to see the inside of a nest and what's actually happening. And I thought that was a really cool picture. Here's another one. This is a ground nesting bee. And so again, it's going through those same stages. And so what you'll see here is the egg, and once that bee lays an egg on the pollen, it may sit there for 1 to 3 weeks, and eventually it will hatch, and then the larva will grow and eat that pollen mass, go through several stages over a period of several weeks, and eventually it will go and form into a pupa. And this may be the point at which it kind of pauses and remains in this state until the following year, during which time it will emerge as an adult and start this whole process over again. Some species do produce multiple generations in a season. And so, you know, it just kind of depends on the bee, but many of them do just produce a single generation. And so, you know, and many of them nest in the ground, as I'll be explaining to you here in a little bit as well. And so much of their time is right below our feet in the ground, just as a pupa waiting to emerge. So as far as bee diversity is concerned, bees are incredibly diverse, and across the planet, we've got an estimated 20,000 species of bees. Here in North America, we have about 4,000 species of bees. And on this picture, you can see the tremendous diversity. This is just 3% of the bees that are here in the US. And I wish that I could make it larger, but I would really encourage you to go to this beesinyourbackyard.com site, and you could probably zoom in closer to see more of the detail. But I just wanted to kind of give you an appreciation for not only the size, I mean, you can see that bees can be really small, and this is relative to one another. So you can see some bees are quite large and some are very, very tiny. Some are hairy, some are very dull in color, others are very bright and metallic, some you know, have very distinctive features, like where they're, you can, like I mentioned before, where their hairs are located, that kind of defines them as a group. But it's pretty tremendous once you start to learn about bees, and you kind of, you know, develop an interest in learning more about them. You can be pretty astounded by how incredible they are, not only in how they appear, but also their behavior as well. And so, and we'll get into that because that becomes an important consideration when we're thinking about protecting them. So we'll get into that here in a little bit. So just to continue a little bit about the classification of bees, there's 7 bee families, and the one that we're most familiar with is the Apidae family, which includes honeybees and bumblebees, also stingless bees, which are most commonly found in tropical forest systems. This includes also in this family carpenter bees and orchid bees, long-tongued bees, dioecious species, and anthophora bees. This is the largest family. It has about 6,000 species. The second largest family is the Halictidae. These are the sweat bees and alkali bees. These are the ones that often annoy people because they may fly around you trying to find those salts on our skin when we're sweating, but they are often brilliant metallic colors. They're beautiful, and there's about 4,500 species. The Megachilidae includes the leafcutter bee that I was sharing with you a few slides ago. Again, these bees are defined by that scopa that's found on their abdomen, and so that's one feature that you can, you know, differentiate. You can now differentiate a megachilid bee from a honeybee just based on those characteristics. And so if you're in your garden, they may be similar in size, but if you can see where they're carrying that pollen, you've already gotten one step further. So hopefully that is information that you can use as you're making your observations around your garden. Other bees in this family, they don't all use leaf materials to line their nests. Some of them use fibers from plants. The carter bees collect plant fibers or hairs from plants, and they separate the cells in their nests using that type of material. Others may use mud, like the mason bees. They collect mud and they partition each cell with mud. And then others may use resins, and so they may collect sap and sticky resins from other plants and use them to help partition the cells within their nests. The Andrenidae bees are the mining bees, and these have a velvety patch on their face. There's about 3,000 species, and they nest in the ground. The Callididae are the polyester bees. These bees are around here. There's one species that is one of the first one that you'll see flying around in the springtime. I was walking around the campus at KU a few years ago and saw a lot of something flying just about maybe 5 inches above the ground. And I was wondering, are those flies? You know, as I got closer, I was looking and I saw that they were actually bees. And come to find out, it was a species of Callides, these in this family Callididae. And these bees are pretty cool because they actually make, from a gland on their body, they create what's kind of like a little tiny Ziploc bag under the ground. And that's what they use to put their pollen and nectar provisions within. And then they will hang their egg above that provision and seal it. And when the egg hatches, the larvae will crawl and it will crawl down to that kind of liquidy pollen provision, and it will consume it as it grows. And the following year, then it will pupate, and then it will emerge as an adult the following spring. And so it spends most of the year, it's under our feet. And for a few weeks in the spring, if we're lucky, we'll see them flying around collecting nectar and pollen. Mostly they're collecting nectar and pollen from a lot of trees, because those are that's what's largely available. But these are found in town often. So do keep your eye out next spring for the Colides bees that could be out and about, busily collecting the resources they need for their young. The Mellididae bees are also mining bees. They are found in more dry climates. It's a smaller family, about 201 species. And lastly, the Stenotrididae are only found in Australia, and this is the smallest bee family. It's characterized by only about 21 species, and so we're not going to be seeing them around here, but nonetheless, they're interesting to learn about and be aware of. So most of us are pretty familiar with what the size of a honeybee, because we see them a lot. This is the world's largest bee that's been described so far, which is pretty amazing. So this is a honeybee next to Megachile pluto, which is has a 2.5-inch wingspan. It's the largest species. It's also known as Wallace's giant bee, and it was first discovered by Alfred Russel Wallace in Indonesia in 1859. And it was thought to be extinct until around 1981, when researchers discovered more of them. Though they have been rediscovered, and thankfully they aren't extinct, they still seem to be kind of rare across their range. And so although it's great that they are still out there, there's still some concern about their conservation status, and so there's a lot to be learned about these bees. Something interesting that you probably noticed right off the bat, aside from its size, are those long mandibles that are coming off the front of its face. And those are used because, like I said, this is a member in the family Megachilidae, and it has those long mandibles that helps it collect resin. And so it's actually one of those bees that will collect resin for its nests. And so I thought this is just pretty astounding. If you're interested, definitely look up more information. There's been some really great articles and actually a video of the bee that's been posted in the last year or two. And so you can definitely find out more information about it if you're interested. And so bees are incredibly important for pollinating, and we can appreciate that because that's kind of one of their claim to fame is bees as pollinators. And a lot of times, we may not even realize how important that service is, because it's often happening as a free ecosystem service that we don't really think too much about. We just reap the benefits of the outcome, which is the fruit or the seeds that are produced by those flowers. But the majority of flowering plants on our planet do rely on pollinators, and pollinators can be bees, they can be flies, they can be beetles, they can be birds. There's an incredible diversity of organisms that are moving pollen from one flower to another and assisting in the process of pollination. And this service, as from a global perspective, has been estimated to be $200 to $500 billion every year. And that's pretty easy to, to understand when you realize that 75% of our global food crops rely on pollinators for that service. And so I just have a quick little rundown list here of some of the foods that are included that rely on pollinators. These include and are not limited to, I just have a few highlighted here: apples, avocado, alfalfa, blueberries, cashews, cherries, chocolate, coffee, cranberries, figs, grapes, grapefruit, kiwi, peaches, papaya, melons, pumpkins, raspberries, blackberries, strawberries, tomatoes, vanilla, and there's even more that I didn't even mention. And so I think we can all appreciate many of those foods that I just mentioned, and we can thank a pollinator for providing the services for us to be able to enjoy these things. And not only for us humans, but for all the other animals that rely on these foods as well for their survival. So you've probably heard 1 in every 3 bites of food, we can thank a pollinator for that. And I'm focusing on bees, and bees are notable for their pollination services, and they're incredibly important for their pollination services because of a few key things. First, their hairy body that I mentioned earlier. As they're moving around the flowers, they're getting a lot of pollen on their body, and they're moving that pollen. They also have a behavior known as floral constancy. And so unlike some organisms, bees tend to forage amongst the same types of flowers in a foraging bout. And so that's increasing the chances of successful cross-pollination, rather than contaminating one flower with the pollen from a different type. Bees often are often foraging amongst the same types of flowers. And so again, that's going to increase, the chances that that flower is going to be, 1, getting that pollen that's all over the hairy body of the bee, and 2, receiving the correct kind of pollen to result in the cross-pollination and successful pollination of that flower. I love this image because I think it really drives home the importance of cross-pollination. And so this is a treatment from a researcher that looked at the influence of pollination treatments on the development of strawberry. So on the left, you see OP, open pollination, a nice big strawberry. The one in the middle is ASP, autonomous self-pollination. So that's one flower that was able to self-fertilize itself. So it didn't receive pollen from another flower. And then the T is wind and self-pollination. So you can see the importance right here of how valuable it is that many plants, are receiving this cross-pollination, these movement of pollen, increasing the genetic diversity of those plants, and resulting in more successful fruit and seed production. Another great just visual here that Whole Foods put out: your produce choices with bees on the left, your produce choices without bees. And so this really helps drive home, what our stores would look like if we don't take into account what's needed for bees to be able to survive and persist and continue to provide these very valuable services for us. And so certainly, it's this in and of itself from a selfish perspective, you want to be able to enjoy a variety of foods, and many of these have very important nutritional benefits for us. And so, we can make the case that protecting bees and conserving them is certainly important from a health perspective, from an economic perspective, and from an environmental perspective, because we're not the only ones that benefit from the pollination services that they're providing. And so again, this is a great sort of just visual and way for you to think next time you're shopping about, you know, what is it that's on these shelves? How is it that this came to be? And many times you can thank a pollinator for that. So now I'd like to get into a little bit of the ecology, and this is what I love talking about this because I really feel like this is information that a lot of times isn't necessarily mentioned when people are doing talks about bees, but I just think it's so fascinating and great because, and I hope that you as master gardeners appreciate, you know, this little bit of information as well, because this is really what's this is the action, this is what's going on out there with our bees, this is what they need, this is how they survive. And so I mentioned earlier when I was talking about the life cycle of the bee, I gave you an example of the ground nesting bee. In fact, the majority of bees do nest underground. And so there's about 30% that nest above ground in stems, whether they be pithy or hollow. And the majority of bee species are also solitary. This is unlike honeybees and bumblebees. So I showed you earlier, and this is kind of a cool example here. It's a drawing, but it kind of shows you the different strategies that bees use for their nesting needs. And so what happens is when bees emerge from their nest, a female bee will mate with a male bee, and after it mates, it will find a nest site. And so whatever that may be for that particular type of bee, whether it's in the ground or inside of a twig or in a log, that female bee that has been fertilized or that has mated with a male will find a nest site, and she will do everything else. And so if it's a ground nesting bee, she'll dig the holes into the ground. She lines it with the material for this top picture here. That's that little Ziploc bag that I mentioned earlier. This is like a polyester type material that they secrete from their glands, and they line, and it waterproofs that small little chamber for the bee to, for her young to be able to develop in. And so she will line the nest, and then she goes out and she collects the pollen and the nectar. If she's a leaf cutter bee or a mason bee, she collects either the leaf or the mud or the resin resources to line the nest for those types of bees. She carries those resources back to the nest. So instead of going out to multiple different places in the environment, she'll find a single nest site, and she'll make multiple foraging bouts surrounding that nest site, gathering the resources that are needed for that nest. And then she lays the eggs in there. A single egg will develop within its own cell. And so these are usually, you know, walled off using whatever materials is specific for that type of bee. And once she has completed doing that at the end of her life, she dies, the mother bee dies, and the following year, those bees that she had laid the eggs within the cells, those bees will emerge, and if they're female, they'll mate with the male, and they'll start the process over again. A lot of times, people wonder, and let me see if I have another, okay, I'm gonna come back here. People wonder about this linear arrangement of cells, and how is it that the bees that are on the inside get out, because there's gonna be other bees in front of it, right? And so that's always a really great question that I like to kind of point out a little bit. So the bee is gonna be collecting pollen and laying an egg on this innermost cell, and she's going to repeat that throughout till she gets to the end, towards the end of that stem. What biologists have found is that typically on the inside of the nest, the most inside cells are the female bees. So these are the bees that will develop to become females, and they take longer to develop. The ones that are located more on the outside are male bees, and they don't take as long to develop. And so that's kind of one way that they're able to successfully emerge without killing each other. If there is a bee that dies inside of here and is kind of trapping the other bees inside, they will chew through it to get in order to get out. And so that's just, you know, the way that they survive. Another type of bee that you may see hanging around, if you have one of those little bee nest things, you may see one of these bees hanging around, and that's a Coleoxys. This is a kleptoparasite, also called, they're also known as cuckoo bees. So you may be familiar with cuckoo birds that lay their eggs inside the nests of other birds, and they, you know, the mother or the host bird raises the parasite's young. Bees do the same thing. And so as this mother bee, say this leafcutter bee is out collecting resources, busily collecting leaf materials, pollen and nectar, this kleptoparasitic bee will sneak in when she's away, and it will quickly lay an egg inside of that cell and then leave. And when that egg hatches and emerges, it will oftentimes kill the host bee's offspring and will consume the pollen that was provided for it and then develop that way. So it's fascinating to learn more about sort of the different types of strategies that bees have evolved, you know, to take advantage of the resources in their environment. These cuckoo bees, you can see they're not really hairy. They don't even have the equipment to be able to create their own nests. And so they're really, you know, specialized to be parasites, and that's how they have survived and have been successful. And they're actually, they have been used as an indicator species for the host, or for the community of host bees in an area, because without the hosts, if they're not present, you're not going to be seeing the parasites. And so a lot of times people have sort of been able to look at the status of the kleptoparasites in a bee community to establish sort of the health of the entire bee community in that area. So here in Kansas, as we probably are all familiar with, our native ecosystem is tallgrass prairie, and only about 1% of the original prairie remains today. We've lost a lot of that prairie. And the reason why this is an important thing to mention today is that in order to think about ways that we can best serve our native bee species, we have to think about the ecosystem that they are adapted to and that they evolved within. And when we think about it that way, we can kind of hopefully develop, you know, more of an awareness, not only of our own native ecosystem in the prairie, but ways that we can learn from it to, you know, incorporate that knowledge into our own spaces, into our own gardens. And so we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. But some recent surveys looking at bee diversity at 4 remnant prairie sites in the Kansas City area found a pretty high diversity of bee species. And so when I say remnant prairie, I'm meaning a prairie that has never been disturbed. And so there are many areas that are restored prairie areas, people that have tried to take an area that was once perhaps agricultural land and convert it back to prairie. So that would be a restoration. But remnant prairies have never been disturbed. And so these are kind of, you know, as I mentioned, only 1% of the whole range of tallgrass prairie remains. And many of them are kind of in these small pockets located around the former range in a much smaller area. But what's hopeful is that researchers did find a pretty high diversity of bees in these prairies, and many of the species were specialists. And so when I say specialist, I mean that certain bees may specialize on a certain type of plant species. And so they will only visit one or just a few closely related species of plants for their offspring to consume and develop on. And so one of them is pictured here. This is a blue sage bee. And so without the blue sage plant, you're not going to get the blue sage bee. And so again, thinking about the ecology can help guide us in what we can maybe do as gardeners and landowners to help encourage, not only the flowers, but also the important organisms that rely on those flowers. I mentioned earlier that bee that I found in the spring flying around KU, Colides inequalis. This is the polyester bee. This is one that you may see in the springtime. They are, again, they collect their pollen and nectar from a lot of trees. That's what's largely available in the spring. And so that's often what they're found foraging on. They also nest in aggregations. They are solitary, so they don't have a hive like a honeybee or a bumblebee. They don't, work with relatives to gather resources, but they may nest in the ground in an area that's got other neighbors that are close by of that species. And so although they're not really interacting other than mating, they are often found in sort of aggregations. And so a lot of times if people see them coming in and out of the ground in the spring in their yard, they may be very concerned, and so I've been really trying to educate people about Colides inequalis because, they're hairy, they're out there collecting pollen, they're not aggressive, they're solitary. And so there's just one of those bees that are really, only active for a very brief time in the spring. And then again, like I said, the rest of the year, they're spent in those little tiny, like plastic-like bags under the ground, and they're developing. And so that's a really neat one that you may see flying around in the spring. Hyriades, this is a resin bee that's in the family Megachilidae. This is a much smaller resin bee than Megachile pluto that we saw earlier. It's solitary. It may nest in one of those structures that have like holes drilled in them, or it may nest in like a hollow twig. And it collects in partitions its nests with resins. And it's a very small black bee. You're probably may even mistake it for, something that's not a bee like a wasp, or because they are hairy, but you can't really appreciate that because they're so small unless you look at it under a microscope. Because they do have that scopa on their abdomen, just like other bees in that family. And just to kind of give you an appreciation for the size, I know it's kind of hard to tell on pictures sometimes, but this is a Hyriades bee that's feeding on a daisy fleabane. And so we know what daisy fleabane, how small those flowers are. And so this is a bee that's foraging on one of those flowers. Others that you may see. These are also, this is another one that you may see around. This is Agochlora pura. This is one of the sweat bees in the Halictidae family. They can be solitary and they can also be semi-social, kind of depending on what's happening in their habitat and the needs for that particular bee. If resources are available and they're able to collect what they need, they may shift strategies depending on resource availability. So they may survive better as solitary and, behaving in a more solitary manner. They may benefit from having a group for protection and for foraging. And so they're kind of plastic in that sense, where they may sometimes have a behavior that's more solitary or more of a semi-social type of behavior. And they nest in the ground. They're active May through August, so you probably see them out and about right now. And they'll produce multiple generations in a year. Females will overwinter under down logs. So a lot of times when we're talking about providing habitat for bees, we kind of recommend leaving areas that are kind of like undisturbed. If you've got an area where you can leave some coarse woody debris, it's kind of on the edge of your yard or in an area where it won't be a tripping hazard, leaving some of those resources in place is going to provide some habitat for different types of bees, including this one. Melisodes is a longhorn bee. This one is, the males are typically, the males are the ones with the really long antennae, but they are specialists on sunflowers. And so if you have sunflowers in your gardens, you may find that you have these types of bees that are foraging among them. They're also nesting underground and they're active midsummer through fall. So we'll probably start seeing them anytime if you haven't already. They also have like that dense scopa that I mentioned earlier that's found on megachilids on their abdomen. This group is in a different family, and they have those scopal hairs all along their legs. And so unlike the honeybees that have that corbicula and concentrate the provisions in a ball on their legs, they will have sort of a whole, their legs have, hairs that are more like surrounding the leg. And so the pollen may just be packed all around the hairs on its body. And so it doesn't have that defined ball of pollen like the honeybee or bumblebee does. And so just to kind of start making some connections here, what I'm hoping to do is really reinforce the ecology of the bees that are out there to help guide us into the direction of what we can do to help them survive. And so I had mentioned that many bees nest underground. The majority of bee species nest underground. So if we're wanting to help provide some habitat, we're going to have to leave some areas in our garden bare so that they're able to excavate those tunnels and make the nests underground that they need. If they are a species of that part of that 30% that nests above ground, then we're going to need to be thinking about plants that have hollow stems and leaving those stems alone, not cutting back our gardens at the end of the fall, but leaving them because they may have bees that are developing inside of them. And so that's also an important consideration. Also, what food and water resources are available. Bees are going to be different types of species, just like our tallgrass prairie. If you go out to a prairie in May, it's going to be a different prairie in June and July and August and September. And so there's also different bees that are active during that time. Some of them may be active across the season, but many of them may only be active during a part of the season, either in the spring or the summer or the fall. And so, if you're thinking about providing resources to support a diverse community of bees, you need to be thinking about providing resources that are available during that whole time period that bees are active. And so we need to be thinking about planting flowers that are blooming in the spring, in the summer, and in the fall. So those resources are always there for whatever bees may be out and about foraging and collecting those resources. Also, I like to mention foraging range because this is what I focused on for my dissertation work, and it's something that's really kind of an interesting and important thing to consider. Foraging range is, for bees, related to body size. So the larger the bee, the larger their area is for them to forage. And so I mentioned they're central place foragers. Once they have a nest site, once that female finds a nest site, she's going to be taking multiple trips to and from that nest, gathering the resources that's needed. And so if she's a larger bee, she's going to be able to forage longer distances to look for those resources. If she's a tiny bee, she's not going to have, she's going to make her trips that are going to be a much shorter radius around that nest site. And so, again, thinking about this diversity of bees, diversity of sizes of bees, providing resources that are kind of available for them. And I'll get into that in this next slide in just a second. But also, we have to consider what are some risks to their survival. And so bees are insects, and if a lot of pesticides are being used in an area, especially non-target pesticides that bees may be foraging and collecting and picking up those chemical residues and may be negatively affected by those. And so really thinking about reducing or eliminating pesticide use, certainly considering when things are applied so that we're not inadvertently harming the insects that are providing so many important services for us. I really like this diagram here that was published because I think it does a really cool job sort of like bringing home what I just talked about. And so I'll kind of talk you through it, and you can kind of think about this a little bit. But in the very center, we've got a bee, and the bee can be have a population size that varies depending on the species and the type of bee that it is. It may have certain life history traits. As I mentioned, maybe it's a leafcutter bee, or maybe it's a mason bee. It may have specific or particular resources that it needs for its own survival. The diet breadth. And so some bees, like I said, are specialists. They may forage only on a few types of plants, maybe even only one. Or they may be generalists like honeybees, and they may be able to forage on multiple types of flowers. Their foraging range, like I just had mentioned before, and also the genetic variability. On the outside of this, this sort of cross is the direct effects. Now this is what we have the most control over when it comes to what we can do to help bees survive. So this includes food abundance. So again, bees are foraging on flowers as adults and as larvae. And so for both stages of their life, they rely on flowers to collect pollen and nectar from. And so we can provide that for them. The food temporal availability. So as I mentioned, for the prairie, we've got, a lot of turnover and different types of flowers that are blooming at different times over the course of the spring and summer and fall. And so incorporating, different types of flowers that are flowering at those different times is going to be providing a more consistent resource for those bees. Nest site availability, so if we're leaving bare areas of bare ground for those ground nesting bees, or resources for the above nesting bees, and also incidental risk, as I had just mentioned on the previous slide, I'm talking about like pesticides and things like that that could be harming the bees as well. On the outside of that circle is land management. These are indirect effects. So these are things that we really don't have as much control over. I mean, we can advocate and we can certainly help try to encourage sound policy to promote, a landscape that's helping bees to be able to survive, makes maybe more resources across the landscape so that bees are able to survive and thrive. But these are things also that bees are faced with, and which is, land management, invasive species, landscape context, and disturbance. And so all of these factors in this diagram are things that affect and influence bees. And so, there are things that we do have the opportunity to participate and affect and influence and help bees out, by providing some of these resources that are direct effects for the bees. So again, some of the threats to bees, these include habitat loss. So if they don't have the food and the nesting resources that they need, then they won't be able to survive. Pesticide use, if they're collecting or being exposed to chemicals that could disrupt not only the adult, but if the adult is carrying that chemical back to the nest, it could negatively affect the developing larvae as well. Invasive species, and so other types of organisms that could negatively affect the bees as well. And one example is the rusty patch bumblebee. This is one that was listed in 2017 as the first bee in the continental US that is listed as an endangered species. And so I just took a screenshot of the Fish and Wildlife Service page talking a little bit about the rusty patch bumblebee. And so it's an example. There are many types of bees, as I had shown you on that poster, kind of giving you a glimpse of bee diversity. There's a lot that we don't know about our native bees. There's a lot that we still have to learn. And so this bee is kind of one example. This is one that we did have more detailed records on. It's a bumblebee, so they're easier to identify on the wing. And so researchers, learned and were able to, figure out that they are incredibly reduced in their range, and they aren't being found as often. And so that's a concern. And there are many other species that also may be going through declines as well. And so that's why it's important for us to be thinking about ways that we can, help. What are some strategies? What are some things that we can do to help conserve these important organisms that are out there providing so much work for us and for other organisms that are out there as well, birds that rely on the seeds that are being produced by the plants that are being pollinated by the bees. And so, there's a whole system out there that relies on the services that bees are providing. And lucky for us, there are many, many organizations that are working tirelessly to help with this very issue. And so I would encourage you, if you are interested, certainly to visit some of these organizations. These are only a few. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but certainly the Xerces Society is a great resource for you to learn more, to find ways to get, to be able to participate if you're interested. Certainly increase your own knowledge about bees. They have lots of resources talking about plants that are specific to this area that you can use as a guide. You can print these resources off and help educate others that, about ways that they can not only create a beautiful garden to enjoy, but also provide one that's functional and providing important resources for the bees as well. A few others, you may be interested in bumblebee watch. As I mentioned, bumblebees are larger, they're easier to identify on the wing. And so there's a lot of organizations that are working to better understand their status. And so this may be taking pictures and submitting it and just providing as citizen scientists a record, which can be used by other researchers to help us understand and build that, that data and that important information so that we can, better monitor and understand what's going on with our native bee species. So I certainly encourage you to participate in those citizen science efforts that are already taking place. Definitely check those out. They're fun, they're very important. And so if you have the time, I know you're already busy as master gardeners, but this is certainly something that would be great for you to be able to do, maybe just with your phone. Take some pictures when you're out there in your gardens if you're seeing bees, and submitting some of that information to some of these causes. There's a few books that I've noted here. There's more that are out there. Again, the Xerces Society is leading the way with resources, and they are an organization that focuses on invertebrate conservation. They have a wealth of information focusing just on bees, but they have a lot more out there as well. And they even have some books that you can order, so you can have one on your shelf that have great information, incredible photography. And so this one, Attracting Native Pollinators, is one that I have that I certainly recommend. And it includes butterflies as well in that one. And so it's a great one to have on your shelf as a resource. One that's looking at bee identification, bees in your backyard, is a really great one as well. And then again, I can't say it enough, but if you go to xerces.org, you'll be able to find information about probably any question that you may have, whether it be the plant types that you should be planting in your gardens for bees, nesting, how to make nesting, provide nesting habitat for bees. They have, instructions on management of those types of things and how to put those together. So I certainly recommend going there next if you have the time, and certainly you will not be disappointed. It's a great place to learn. It's an awesome website. So now I think I have taken quite a bit of your time, and I hope that you have learned something today new about bees. And at this time, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And if I'm not able to answer them, I hope that I can try to find, the information to point you in the direction to learn more about. But thank you. I appreciate your time and your attention.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Daphne, Dr. Mays. This was excellent. What an excellent presentation. Yeah, I have definitely learned a lot, and our chat boxes got some great questions and great comments. If everybody wants to unmute themselves and turn on their video cameras again, Dr. Mays, if you want to stop share on the screen,
yep,
and we can do a little gallery view and have everybody ask their questions or their comments if they'd like. Deanna had some great questions. Deanna, are you still around? If you want to, I can ask for you. She was wondering, are the leaf cutters female because they were further along in the egg chamber? They were in the innermost chamber.
Good question. So bees are what's called haplodiploid. And so they actually, if a female bee, so I mentioned when when a bee emerges, that female will mate with a male. And so she controls the sex of her progeny. So if she fertilizes that egg when she lays it, then it will become a female adult bee later. If she lays an egg and it's not fertilized, then it will become a male bee. And so she can control the sex of her offspring. And she does that. In those types of bees, what they found most often is that the female bees she's fertilizing the ones that are on the innermost parts of those nests, and the ones on the outermost kind of exit area of those tunnels tend to be male.
Well, that is powerful. Let's see. She also was wondering if you could share any specific information on the killer bees that are migrating to the upper Northwest.
Killer bees or the hornet? Is it the killer bees, or is it the hornet that's been capturing headlines?
Murder.
I'm not sure. Do you see your little microphone in your video down in the left-hand corner if you wanted to unmute yourself? Oh, there she is.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm new to this procedure. I'm not sure. I've just been reading and hearing from cousins in Washington that there's the invasive species now of, they call them killer bees. So I'm not sure if I'm talking about the hornet or the bee, and I assumed you would, and that it's a real problem for them in their apple orchards, and they're trying to, collect them and capture enough so that they can gain some more information, but that they felt these were migratory from other places in the world.
Okay. Well, if it's killer bees, I haven't really read much recently about those. Those are the Africanized honeybees that most of the time when people say killer bees, they're referring to the bees that were migrated from Brazil. They were part of kind of a species that were escaped and moved through and kind of are more aggressive. They're a honeybee, but they're an African honeybee. And so they have more aggressive sort of behavior compared to the European honeybees that people use for beekeeping oftentimes. And I haven't read much recently about their movement up into the Pacific Northwest, so I'm not really sure about that question, if that's in fact what it is you're talking about. I did read about the murder hornets and read that there have only been a few that have actually been found. And so it's not, even though it's important to recognize that we have an invasive species here and we should be keeping track of it. And they're certainly large and intimidating, but that they have a very different habitat where they're from originally, and the forests that they're from are different than the ones that are in the Northwest. And so, certainly people are going to be watching out and making sure that it's, kind of keeping track of it. But the murder hornets, from what I've read, aren't, a huge danger right now to, other bees or other organisms at the moment. These things always, we just have to monitor and keep track. But from what I've read so far, there've only been a few found in Canada. And there's just, there's not enough data right now to say how well they're going to do, really.
Who are the murder hornets murdering? Are they murdering people or other insects?
Yeah, so they're notorious for
honeybees.
going in and killing a honeybee colony. They can, I guess I've read just, and again, I've only read a few articles about this, that they can, you know, kill people, but it's kind of like people getting killed by bees, you know, like it can happen, but it's not common. Like it's very rare that it happens. And so, but the murder name comes from from what I could understand, it comes from them attacking colonies of honeybees.
My other question, sorry, might be more apropos to our area. The invasive species of the Japanese beetle. What does it have an impact on our native bee population? They drive me crazy.
I have not heard any kind of effect. I haven't heard or read about any kind of interactions with Japanese beetles and bees. So I haven't.
They're certainly eating my flowers, which impacts my, you know,
yeah,
the bees if I don't have the flowers.
And it's a great point, and it's a great observation, because, you know, certainly if you've got a mass of beetles hanging around, blocking the resources from the bees, then they could certainly be, you know, negatively affecting that bee. But I haven't, I'm not aware of any studies that have looked at that, like broadly, you know, to see if that's the case. But I think that's a really cool, and, you know, an important observation and insight that you're getting from your garden. And certainly I'm gonna write that down and see if I can find anything.
So we can read your next paper that comes out.
Yeah, you've just given me a great topic to explore.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, more from the chat box. Kevin says, what a wonderful webinar for National Pollinator Week.
Oh, thank you. Yes, isn't that great? What a cool, what perfect timing. I'm sure you guys timed this just, you know, I don't know if you did it on purpose, but it was great timing.
Let's see, and also Nathan Michael, he was saying, I have found an environmental friendly pesticide that I use in my organic garden that works fairly well. Dr. Bronner's Pure Castile soap. It is a liquid that I add to my sprayer. It is peppermint scented, and I found it at Hy-Vee. They also have it at Walgreens and Dillon. So there's some alternatives to pesticides out there.
And it's great that you're all able to sort of, you know, share this knowledge with each other, kind of thinking about, you know, ways that we can manage and keep our gardens healthy without having to resort, you know, to using other types of harsh chemicals that could be detrimental to the beneficial organisms.
And then finally from the chat box, Kevin asks, can you talk about the latest status of honeybee colony collapse?
I can't speak on this year, the data, but I know that from what I've read the last few years, it's an ongoing, you know, problem that many beekeepers are still wrestling with a variety of different negative factors affecting their colonies, colony collapse disorder, various types of invasive pests and pathogens. Yeah, the state of honeybee keeping right now, I think that from what I've read, and again, I don't know the numbers from, because they do keep great records on this, so we should be able to find information on how colonies are, you know, how they overwintered and how they're doing. and I'll make a note to see if I can find that information for you. Because last I read, and this isn't recent, is that they were still struggling. So.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
There's another question from Becky Cunningham. She says, Kevin, do you know if cardinals eat Japanese beetles? We watched one this morning observing the beetles on our oak leaf hydrangea, like he was looking for lunch.
I don't know for sure if they do or not, but I wouldn't be surprised. They like to eat a lot of bugs. I don't know why they wouldn't eat them.
And then Kevin says, Governor Kelly would have done a proclamation for Kansas Pollinator Week again this year, but they have suspended issuing proclamation through the end of June of 2020.
Yeah, try again next year.
Kind of like Kansas, well, along those same lines, Daphne, do you know why the honeybee was chosen as the state insect? Is there any lore behind that, or?
I'm not sure. It's a great question. Why the honeybee? They certainly are a common, there's a lot that's known about honeybees, you know, because of beekeeping. So they're cosmopolitan. You can find them almost everywhere. And there's tons of research that's been done on them. There's tons of information about them. I kind of wonder though, who decided the honeybee was going to be the state insect? Why? I don't know. It's a great question. I think that, as I had told you earlier, I hope that one day I can inspire somebody to change that to a native bee species. That would be great.
Which species would you like to see as a Kansas state insect?
This is really hard for me to answer because there's so many that I like and that are dear to me. But I guess from an educator's perspective, I would have to choose Agachlora pura, which is the sweat bee, because of its varied nature. If you learn about it, you learn, you know, about the fact that bees can be social or solitary. So it kind of, in one bee, it kind of covers a lot of really interesting life history information. Plus they're beautiful. They're like flying jewels. So.
Well, I hope somebody picks up that crusade.
I do too.
So another question, a couple more questions. Nathan Michael asks, how does residents keeping honeybees affect the general honeybee population? So do residents keeping honeybees affect the general honeybee population in any way?
I'm not sure about like wild honeybee colonies and how they may be interacting with managed honeybee colonies. And there's been, you know, a few studies done looking at honeybees interacting or competing with native bees for resources, but I think that in some cases, you know, they found that honeybees are sort of can outcompete native bees for certain resources, and in some cases, when it comes to like pollination services, they can actually be beneficial, because that can be a beneficial thing because they're moving those bees from one sunflower to another sunflower. And so there's a lot of really interesting dynamics going on there. But as far as the wild honeybee populations and the managed honeybee populations, I'm not really sure about that.
Dr. Mays, I love how you call their pollination a service, services that they provide. Is that language that all you bee folk use, or is that something from your own of them as creatures?
That's just what is commonly used in the literature. I mean, it is a service. You know, we don't often think of it as one, but certainly if we lose our bees and we're out there having to pollinate them with little tiny paintbrushes, pollinate the plants that we want, then we will recognize and appreciate how much of a service it really is. So hopefully it doesn't get to that point, but that's why we're here. You know, that's why we're talking about them and trying to find ways that we can protect them and the services that they provide, because certainly they're not doing it for us. They're doing it for themselves, right? And so they are doing it to provide resources for their young. And by chance, you know, they've evolved to, you know, provide a beneficial service for a flower, which is reproduction. You know, flowers can't get up and move. And so they've evolved, you know, more efficient strategies to entice an organism to visit it so it can move that reproductive parts from one flower to another. So yeah, certainly it's a service that's very important.
Nancy says, I believe that the honeybees were, as the state insect, was put forth by our legislature or put forth to the legislature by a grade school class.
Okay. Yeah.
And
well,
then,
you know, and to be honest with you, that's cool, but there's a real need to, and there's a real interest to go into schools and talk to kids about the diversity of pollinators and the fact that, you know, that honeybees aren't actually from here. I've had kids say, what? They're like, why? You know, surprised. So again, I'm not meaning to negate the honeybee. They're important pollinators, and they're certainly providing important services for us, but there's a lot of native bee species that we could be looking to as well to celebrate.
sure. Like maybe one of those specialized to sunflowers, our state flower.
Yeah, exactly. That would be great.
Kevin says, according to the Audubon Society, cardinals will eat Japanese beetles. The champion beetle eaters are European starlings, followed by blue jays, robins, crows, grackles, kingbirds, woodpeckers, and purple martins, to name a few. Some birds eat the grubs, some the adult beetles, and some both. And Becky said, good to know, thanks. And Kevin asks, are bees the most important insect pollinators? I know there are lots of flies that are pollinators too.
Yeah, great question. And certainly there are other pollinators that are important as well. But because of the, you know, the traits and the behaviors that I had mentioned, the fact that bees are hairy, that they visit among the same types of flowers and the same foraging bouts, those are the types of things that make them, I'm not gonna say they're better than flies, because there's certain types of, it kind of depends on your plant too, from the plant's perspective, because
Right.
some plants are going to be, you know, have evolved to attract flies. And so, but certainly, like, from a broad perspective of flowering plants, bees are probably the insect that we really need to be paying attention to, and in figuring out ways to conserve them. But like I said, there's plants that attract flies, and so those plants are going to be, you know, wanting the flies around. So, and beetles
Like chocolate.
What's your dogwood?
No, I said like chocolate.
Yeah.
chocolate depends on two little midges
Uh-huh.
for pollination, but but I think the thing that fascinates me the most about insect pollinators is how, you guys were just talking about like how specialized some of them are, and it's just amazing how a particular plant and a particular insect evolve together, to have this mutualistic relationship where one really can't survive without the other.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And it's almost it's almost like they were so successful with this one, relationship that could be leading to their demise,
Right.
depending on the environment and whether the resources are available or not.
Right. Well, I was reading that like that little bee that uh, pollinates vanilla. What's it called? Melipona bee, I think. But they think, because they think that it's maybe, or it's going to go extinct because there's so few left in the wild. And, and I guess like they only exist in like Mexico, where the vanilla first came from. Other places, like a lot of vanilla comes from Madagascar now, and they have to hand pollinate all of those plants to, because there's no native insects there that will pollinate it, because
Yeah.
the shape of the flower is so complex. It takes a very specialized little bug to be able to get in there to get the job done.
Exactly. No, that's great. That's a great example of why it's important, to be thinking beyond honeybees, because a lot of times people think, well, we have honeybees, so what's it matter that we have, is it really that important if the honeybees are pollinating? And yeah, it is important, because there are other, relationships that flowers have developed with other types of pollinators. Honeybees may not be suited for that.
Right. Well, I mean, aren't they primarily pollinating agricultural crops? I mean, most of all the other pollination that goes on out in the natural world is, dependent on our native bees.
Yeah.
For the most part, isn't that right?
Well, I think it depends on the area,
Uh-huh.
and it certainly depends on the disturbance of that area and what's there, and what's the history of the site. All those factors can come into play as to what you see, because I mean, I can go to my family's farm, which is out in the country, and see honeybees flying around visiting, different types of flowers.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of factors that could go into that, but definitely you're right in that you go to a natural area and you're going to probably see more native species, because those resources are there in that area that they need. But we can learn from those areas and incorporate some of those plants into our own gardens and backyards and areas, and hopefully help make more of a connection in the landscape, so that these bees are able to move around more spaces.
Well, don't get me wrong. I got nothing against European honeybees. I eat a lot of honey, and
Yeah.
I use it for medicinal purposes. I mean, honey is a pretty amazing substance, just in itself.
It is, and honeybees are fascinating too to learn about, and they are important, important players in the pollination world, definitely. But I think that it's time for us to, be considering a more holistic perspective to supporting not only them, but the native species that are out there doing, pollination work as well.
Well, and what about bee houses? I mean, I see them promoted a lot, but I don't know. I mean, from my perspective, it seems like we'd be better off trying to provide more natural habitat for bees instead of just putting up little houses for them.
Right. I think I would definitely agree with you. I think providing more natural habitat is definitely like, preferred. But, in some cases, certainly to observe and appreciate the wonders of watching a bee.
Oh, uh-huh.
It's
I never thought about that.
it's kind of amazing to be able to put it's kind of like a birdhouse in a way.
Yeah.
But I will say that, I've talked a lot about this, these bee boxes and hotels, because that's the type of sort of group that I studied for my research. And so what's important is that people understand that anytime you provide anything that's artificial, it's going to have to be managed,
Uh-huh.
And so like I said, the Xerces Society has great resources on how to make these things and also how to maintain them and manage them, so that you're not inadvertently harming the things that you're trying to promote.
Right.
Because you can have a buildup of pathogens in there that can spread. And so just making sure that it's maintained properly, then you can enjoy the wonder of watching a leafcutter bee carrying a petal from a flower in your garden to its nest, which is really amazing.
I know, I loved that little
Amazing.
picture of the bee with the little leaf in his mouth parts. It was amazing. Super.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, just in the last couple of days, I was out in my backyard and I saw some little redbud saplings where the leafcutter bees had been cutting the little, circles out of them.
Yes.
Oh, and that reminds me, I wanted to ask you, so when you're trying to create nesting habitat for native bees, particularly the ones that nest above ground, so because we have this native plant garden, and traditionally we've gone in and, cleaned out the dead material. But I'm thinking, I'm a co-chair of that committee, but I'm thinking that we need to leave some of that dead plant material in there. One thing I read was saying that, if you can't just leave it untouched, then to go in and cut it off like about 10 inches above the ground and leave that much there, and it will preserve quite a bit of material for the, and particularly material that bees have already built nests in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I think that definitely just, leaving some of that material alone. I realize that and appreciate the fact that some places have more strict management policies, but definitely leaving some of those twigs in place is gonna be an important consideration for the habitat of the bees. And even leaving some of that ground cover, I've been reading a little bit more about, leaving leaves instead of breaking them up and getting rid of them all. There's a lot of insects that overwinter.
Oh, right.
In that debris. And so like fireflies and different types of other insects that are really important, providing habitat for them as well. Just kind of following nature's example, I guess, whenever possible. And certainly, doing kind of just thinking beyond just it being a beautiful aesthetic, and thinking about it as being a functioning ecosystem,
just a few more things from the chat box. Back to the birds and who eats the Japanese beetle. Carolyn Steele said, it's good to know that the European starlings have some good qualities.
Yeah, well, you know, they're another bird that if you have a grub problem in your turf grass, a lot of times that's a way you can tell, because you'll see a whole flock of starlings out there, you know, tearing up your grass to get to the grubs. But so, yeah, I guess, and you know, every living thing is like got some, you know, positive aspect to it. But I do have to say they're not my favorite bird.
Well, and then finally, I guess that we should maybe make this the last question. Becky, she's asking, are there any type of bees that we need to be particularly cautious around, like hornets? And I have always just let the bees do their thing in the garden without bothering them.
That's a really good question. So this kind of goes back to the life history of the bees. And so you mentioned hornets, those are wasps. And it can be hard to tell sometimes if it's a wasp or a bee, but it is important to distinguish the two. And another important thing is that most of our native bee species are solitary. And so they don't have a colony to defend. They don't have resources that they're trying to protect actively. They've got their little nest hole that they're flying, you know, and collecting resources to provision, you know, for their offspring. But it's a very different lifestyle than that of like honeybees that do have a colony and that do have a caste system where they've got a queen in there laying eggs. And, you know, they are more aggressive because they have, you know, a social structure. So they have bees that are going to be defending those resources for their survival. Now, it's not to say that a native solitary bee wouldn't sting you if you grabbed it and held it in your hand, because all female bees do have stingers. That's just a modified ovipositor, which is from, they've evolved that stinger from, you know, earlier species that used it to deposit eggs inside of like coarse materials like wood. But so females have stingers, the males don't have stingers. So if you were to capture a male bee in your hand, you don't have to worry about getting stung. But most of the time when you see bees out foraging, it's typically probably going to be a female bee collecting resources for her nest, and just do what you said that you do. You leave them alone. They go about their business. They're busy, you know, they've got a lot to do, and they're not going to be aggressively trying to attack you. I have noticed my mom, their farm has an abundance of carpenter bees, and they seem to be a little bit more, I wouldn't say aggressive. I've never been stung by one, but I think that they become more territorial when they're mating, and they may kind of fly at you. But I've never been stung by one, and I'm one that's watching them and I'm around them and paying attention. But I haven't been stung by native bees, even though I've been in their environment and watching them for a long time. So I hope that helps. You don't have to worry so much about native bees aggressively attacking you, because they're, like I said, they're mostly just moving to and from their nest. They don't have a colony. Honeybees are different though, you know, and as you know, if you know, try getting into a honeybee hive, they're gonna try to protect it. And so you have to be much more careful with honeybees. That's why people wear gear and protect themselves when they're harvesting honey.
Well, with that, I would like to extend my deep gratitude to Dr. Mays. What a fascinating presentation. I learned so
Yeah.
much. I think everybody else did too. And I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us. I truly hope you learned something new, perhaps strengthened your appreciation for all of the life around us and a better understanding of those who may be relying on the wild spaces in your own backyard. So take care, everyone. I hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Happy Pollinator Week.
Yeah, happy Pollinator Week. Thanks a lot.
Thank
Great
you.
presentation.
Thank you. Enjoy. Have a great summer.
You too.